Now in this video I will be talking about the first component of the gross domestic product, that's consumption. So let me now talk about the consumption in detail. Now what does consumption actually mean? It is the value of all the goods and services that's bought by household. So whatever the household is spending is counted as a consumption, whether they are spending on durable goods or on the non-durable goods. All of them is included in the consumption. Now what we want to study in the consumption, we want to study the take it to the next level, and want to study the intertemporal choice. Now before we talk about the intertemporal choice, I want to just we are going to study a very basic model, that is a two period basic model. Now before I introduce you to the two period basic model and to the intertemporal choice, let me make some notations. In this case, the y1 and y2 is going to be the income in period 1 and 2. Now the C1 and C2 is going to be the consumption in period 1 and period 2. Now then we have this S, and this is going to be y1 minus c1, which is going to be savings in period 1. Now I did not use S1 and S2 over here because we assume that we are only living for two periods, that's y1 and that's period 1 and period 2, and we are not going to live after the period 2, which means that we are going to consume everything in the period 2. That is the basic assumption behind the two period basic model. Now the savings can be less than 0 if the consumer has borrowed in the period 1. We will talk about that in detail. Now what does the intertemporal choice mean? It means that it's a process by which the people make decisions about what and how much to do at various points in time. Now what does a consumer want to do? Say for example, consumer has two options. Either he can consume everything he can consume his income that he earns in the period 1, or he can just postpone his consumption in the period 1 and take save that money and that consume that in the period 2. Now in this case, if the consumer has made a choice of not consuming in the period 1 and while saving that in the period 1 and then consuming in the period 2, so simply he will utilize this income in the period 1, assuming that he is not consuming anything. He can simply invest it for a period of some time, say for example 1 year. So in period 2 he can consume the income that he has earned in the period 1, plus the interest that he is going to earn in the period he is going to earn by investing the income in the period 1. Now, suppose a consumer wants to consume everything in the period 1. So in this case, he will consume this income in the period 1, plus he will consume also the present value of the income that he is going to receive in the period 2, and he is going to consume that today only. Now the consumer has two choices: either he will consume everything in the period 2, or he can consume everything in the period 1. Now, if he consumes everything in the period 2, then he will have the future value of the income of the period 1, plus the income that he is going to earn in the period 2. Now, if he is going to consume everything in the period 1, then he has a choice. Then in this case, he is going to consume the income that he generates in the period 1 and the present value of the income that he is going to generate in the period 2. Now, given this choice, the consumer is faced a constraint, and that constraint is known as intertemporal budget constraint. Now, what does a budget constraint means? It simply put, before talking about the budget constraint, let me first talk about. Let me just solve it for the budget constraint. Now, in period 1, so consumption is equal to y1 minus s1. So consumer is constrained that in the period 1 he can just consume this amount of the money, because he has to save some amount of the money. Now in period 2, however, the constraints are going to be something different. In period 2, the consumption is going to be equal to the earnings that he is making in the period 2 plus the savings that he has made in the period 1, and the interest that he is going to earn on those savings. Therefore, in period 1, savings are going to be equal to y1 minus s1, sorry, y1 minus c1 consumption. Now, if we talk about this, and in period 2, what is going to happen then? In period 2, savings is going to be equal to y2 minus c2, and we are going to take the present value, because we are going to consume everything in the period 1 as we did over here. So we have to take the present value, and in this case we are consuming everything in the period 2, so in this case I took the future value. Now let me just simplify it. Now let me just equate to solve for the intertemporal budget constraint. Let me just equate the two things. Let me just equate y1 minus c1 is equal to y2 minus c2. However, it cannot be equal if we do not account for the discounting factor. Now these two can be equal. In this case, now let me just put a y's on one side, and therefore I can use it like this: y1 minus y2 and the present value 1 plus r, just splitting it up, then c1 minus c2 and 1 plus r. So this is going to be the present value of the lifetime lifetime income, and this is going to be the present value of lifetime consumption. So now if I model this up in the graph, say for example this is my consumption in period 2 and this is my consumption in the period 1, and I will draw up a line that connects these two. Now what does these 2 points signify over here? The very important thing to mention, this says that I am going to consume everything in the period 1, which means that if I earn income in the period 1 plus whatever I am going to earn in the period 2, I am going to consume that today, so I have to discount it. Now in this case I say I am going to postpone my consumption, therefore what I am going to consume in period 2 is going to be income that I am going to generate in the period 2 plus the income that I have generated in the period 1, and I have to also incorporate the interest because it has been this amount of the money has been deposited in the bank account, so I'm going to earn some interest as well. So the interplay between these two choices is known as the budget line. Now one of the interesting points in this budget line is a point called as endowment point. Now endowment point. Now, what does this endowment point mean? This endowment point means that I am going to consume the income Y1 that I am going to generate in the period 1. I am going to consume whole of that income in the period 1, and I am going to consume whole of that income in the period 2. Whatever I am earning in the period 1, I am going to consume that in the period 1, and whatever income that I am earning in the period 2, I am going to consume that in the period 2. So there are no savings and borrowings on the endowment point. Now notice over here, in this case a consumer is consuming the income that is generating in the period 1, plus he is also generating he is also consuming what he is going to generate in the period 2. So in this case the consumer needs to borrow, because savings in this case are going to be less than 0. Therefore the consumer has to borrow this amount to consume in the period 1. Now over here the consumer is postponing his consumption and is consuming everything in the period 2. In this case the consumer is saving, therefore the savings are going to be greater than 0. So now these are the three important points that we need to understand. Now there are now another important concept that you need to understand is that what the vertical intercept. The vertical intercept over here is going to be equal to, vertical intercept is y1 plus y2 and 1 plus r. What does this mean? It means that consumer is consuming everything in the period 1, and then we have another one that is horizontal intercept. Now the horizontal intercept is going to be equal to y2 plus y1 1 plus r. Now and the endowment point, let us call it as E. Now this is going to be the endowment point at which everything is being consumed in period 1, and whatever I am earning in period 1 is consumed in period 1, and whatever I am earning in period 2 is consumed in the period 2. And another important thing is the slope of this line, slope of the budget line. So the slope of the budget line is going to be 1 divided by 1 plus r. So this is how we actually talk about the intertemporal budget constraints. Now the next thing that we are going to talk about is the intertemporal choice. At which point a consumer should choose. Now the next concept we are going to talk about is intertemporal choice. Now let me make up the budget line again. So this is my consumption in period 2, this is my consumption in period 1, this is my budget line. Let me draw up some indifference curves on which the consumer is indifferent about the different combinations that we get over here. Now suppose we have these points like A, B, C and D and E. We have already talked about this in the microeconomics, where the consumer choose that point at which the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line, The similar logic applies over here. A consumer chooses that point at which the indifference curve is going to be the tangent to the budget line. So all of this area over here is going to be the affordable area that a consumer can afford given his level of income. So he can consume this amount, and anything about it is not affordable, and the consumer is going to make a choice which bundles actually to buy. So he's going to buy actually the at the point C, because in this case he's on the highest indifference curve, and he is also is also on the highest indifference curve, and he's also making the and at this point the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line. Now the next thing that we are going to talk about in this case is the what if the interest rates on the borrowings and the savings are going to be different. So now what I'm going to talk about is that what will happen if the interest rates on borrowings and savings are different. Now we have already talked about this a moment ago, that this is my consumption 2, this is my consumption 1, so this is going to be my vertical intercept y1 plus y2 1 plus r. So in this case this is I am borrowing, so I will use r subscript b. In this case I am saving, so I will use 1 plus r subscript s plus y2. Okay, now this point is going to be my endowment point that I already talked about. Now earlier we made an assumption that the borrowing and the savings rate are going to be same, and I also know that this is my borrowing area. Let me change the color. So this area over here is the area in the red is my borrowing area, because I am borrowing in this case, and let me change this also. So this over here, this in the blue, is my saving area. Now what I'm assuming is that the interest rates in case of the borrowing and the savings are going to be different. Now let me say, for example, when the interest rates on the borrowings go down, what is going to happen if the interest rates on the borrowing go down? If the interest rates on borrowing go down. But before understanding that, now earlier we assumed that because we assumed that borrowings and savings had the same interest rate, therefore the slope of this line was 1 divided by 1 plus r. Now since there are going to be two different rates, one for the borrowing, another for the saving, therefore there are going to be two different slopes, and there is going to be a kink over here because the rates are going to be different. Therefore the slope of this part, the slope of this red part, is going to be 1 divided by 1 plus r, that is for the borrowing rate, and the slope of this part is going to be 1 divided by 1 plus r, that is the saving rates. So this is going to be, there is going to be a different slopes for the for the two parts. Now what I was talking about is that if the interest rates on the borrowings go down, which means that this number is going to get reduced. This number is going to get reduced, and if we divide by the lower number, therefore there is the whole number is going to increase, which means that this is going to widen up. So this is going to be something like this. Now if the interest rates go down, it is this line, the line is going to widen up over here. Now alternatively, if the interest rate is going to go up, therefore this number is going to increase and the whole number is going to decrease, Therefore, in this case, the line is going to be something different. It's going to be something like this. Now, so this it's going to widen up if the interest rates go down, and it's going to reduce down. It's going to get more steeper if the interest rates is going to go up. So in the similar way we can do it for the savings, when the saving rate is going to increase and when the saving rates is going to decrease. So in both the cases, there is going to be the two different slopes for this line if the interest rate on borrowings and the savings are going to be different, and there is going to be a kink between these two parts, the borrowing part and the saving part.